Welcome to the Money Insights Podcast, where high income earners come to learn wealth building strategies that will take them from high income to high net worth. With your hosts, financial and wealth building experts, Christian Allen and Rod Zabriskie.
Welcome into today's episode of the Money Insights Podcast. I'm your host, Christian Allen. With me, as always, Rod the Pod Zabriskie. Rod, what is up, man?
Hey, I am doing great. How are you?
I'm really good. I'm just happy to see the sun shining because it's been a little bit dreary lately.
A little bit, yeah.
And then, it's been a little dreary, a little depressing because we decided to go on record telling everybody that we're BYU fans just in time for them to lay an egg against Kansas, and the perfect record goes out the window. And yeah, I'm feeling a little depressed. I got to be honest with you.
I understand why, but I'm sticking to still college football. I just love it.
Okay. Well, I like the optimistic attitude. Okay. So, Rod, I'm excited today. We're going to do something that I think is kind of fun. And we're going to talk about the top 10 things that high income earners waste money on. So we're not talking just specifically about financial mistakes. We're talking like very directly about ways that we see high income earners frequently wasting their money. And can I just tell you, this is me being as open and transparent as possible. I think I fit in at least 5 of these.
Well, so I have a feeling that as we go through these, there will be some moments where we'll say, it's true that this is where people are wasting money, and yet sometimes we choose to be okay with that, right?
Mm-hmm. There's no question. So I do know that there are some places that I waste money. But so again, this isn't us like trying to make anyone feel bad. This is just where we see wasted money. And to your point, sometimes you're just completely content, happy with knowing that you're kind of quote unquote wasting money, or maybe to you that's not actually a waste of money because there's more value in it for whatever reason, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So if it's a choice, then great, you're doing that. But if as we can stir up some thoughts and someone says, oh, well, I think maybe that does apply to me and I should at least check it out, right? Then it's worth it.
Yeah. Okay. So wasting money can look and feel a lot of different ways. And we're going to come in hot on this one. We're not going to be talking about an item. We're going to be talking about the number one way that we're going to, I shouldn't say it's the number one. These are not in an order and like in terms of like what we see most frequently. These are just the things that we felt like we commonly see and that we believe, right? So some of it's a belief.
Yeah.
Okay, we're going to come in hot with number 1, overpriced financial advisors who don't deliver. Whoo, that's right. We're going in hot, Rod. We're coming
Nail
in
it.
hot. Okay, so I have a lot of thoughts on this. I typically don't see financial plans that are anywhere worth the value that people pay for them. Like, I'm just going to be really honest. Now, you could pay a financial advisor in a lot of different ways. If I have money in the market, maybe it's a percentage fee. That's become like less in favor, although I still think that's the most common. Because again, advisors want that. That's how they typically want to be paid, because that gives them reoccurring revenue, and it's based on like they get paid regardless of performance. Right. So there's really value in having like an assets under management fee for the advisor. But like that ends up for a lot of people just being a drag on their investment. And you're not getting much more than what you would get from going directly to Fidelity and getting in low cost mutual funds. Right.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of like, and I do think there's been an awakening in that front. But I still my experience tells me that despite that being the case, most people still fit into this camp somewhere. Now, it's become more in favor. Like if you're more financially savvy, then you're not looking for an advisor who pays or gets paid an AUM percentage. You're talking about someone who is a fee-only advisor, but specifically only gets paid for their advice or their plans, right?
Yeah.
So now you're talking about, okay, I want a financial plan. I'm going to pay you $2,500. I've seen all sorts of numbers. Can I just tell you? I have seen anything up to 20 grand as a singular financial plan. But going back to my point, the reason I say that they waste money on is because most of the time you just don't need it. And there's not a lot of value above and beyond like what you could do yourself really, really easily. So like if you went into your like Chat GPT and said, hey, I want to make a comprehensive financial plan and here's my information and here are my goals and objectives, you would get virtually the same thing that you're getting for paying $2,500 for or $5,000 for. Right now, you might get some fancy projections, or you might get it might be built inside of, some sort of fancy software. But at the end of the day, like that's usually what it's spitting out. It's usually a software that an advisor has. They place the XYZ information into it and it spits out the information that then we're then going and charging the person to pay for. So like, it's not that there's no value there, but again, this is my humble opinion. In my humble opinion, there's not near the value that people tend to end up paying for it. What's your take?
And that's
Rod? You might have a totally different take.
Let's go back to the percentage side as well, because if you're paying your advisor, say it's a 1% fee, and in that situation, they want to justify earning the fee, and so what I've seen is there's a lot more buying and selling and trading, which again, that's what you're hoping that they're doing, is trying to put you in an optimal position so they have triggers that will cause the buying and selling. The problem is you've paid them their 1%, which you said, they're earning it either way. And the other thing that they try to do is couch it in the sense that, hey, we're incentivized together, right? I'm incentivized to grow your portfolio. And if I do, then I'll earn a little more money, but it's all based on the 1% fee. And yet at the same time, it's not like they don't get paid if they don't perform, right? It's just they get paid a little bit more if they're able to grow your account.
So it feels like a story, like a narrative that advisors tell rather than a real value, right? Yeah. If it was like, hey, I'm not going to get paid on this unless we perform in these ways or hit these benchmarks or whatever, like now that would be something, right? But that's typically not the way it works.
Yeah. But then when you think about, I'm paying them 1% and whatever trade costs that exist on the platform and all these other things, if the actual stocks are performing at an average of, let's just say 10%, well, immediately I know my return is going to be somewhere around 8 or 9%. Because I gave up.
9 would be if you were really clean on fees, right?
Right.
That would have to be like a 1%, but that's just not realistic. When they say a 1% advisor fee, it's usually a 1% advisor fee plus the typical trading fees that exist as well. Yep. So like it would more typically look like, 1.8%, 2.2%. I've seen fee structures as high as 3.5%.
Yeah. Especially inside qualified plans, right?
Yeah, in a qualified plan, and variable annuities tend to have really high. Not all of them. Like there are some that provide real value but some of them do have higher fee structures, right? So, which again, I'm not one of those people that doesn't believe in paying for value. So if you're getting real value from it, I always talk about the example of using. Why can't I ever think of the name of them? They use the 2 and 20 model. It's not coming to me, Rod.
Oh, hedge funds.
Hedge funds, yeah. So if I'm someone that believes in the concept and I'm getting real value, then I have no problem paying a fee for that. The problem here is that typically they're not getting the value out of it. So it's oftentimes just dragging out. Like, think about it this way: if you had $2 million in your portfolio, and you're being charged a percent fee just for the advisor, plus whatever fees are underneath, like chances are you could go to, again, one of these low cost index fund type things, get a very similar result and pay 1.5% less. Yeah. And what does that look like? Well, for every $1 million, that's 15 grand, Yeah. So suddenly it's 30 grand a year. And then whatever the growth is, so it just becomes extra money that's dragging down a portfolio. So for that reason, we wanted to make sure we talked about wasting money on overpriced financial advisors, specifically who don't deliver. Okay, Rod, number two, and this one's interesting. I've seen this out there, but number two is tax strategies that sound too good to be true. Okay. So this one is always a challenge because, and I've seen this world for the last 20 years. I've seen one of the things that is not lacking out there is creativity on ways to try to save taxes. Unfortunately, sometimes those methodologies, whether that it's on purpose or not, tend to cross that line, and it ends up being a really kind of painful and costly mistake. Like you can waste a lot of money by going into something that at the end of the day you kind of know is too good to be true and probably won't work out. Maybe you're even saying like, hey, you know, I know that this thing's in the gray area, and you know, I'm taking on higher risk, but maybe I'm willing to accept it, but I don't really think I'm going to end up having to deal with it. That's kind of what happens, right? You're like, I'll play the odds. Like there's a 75% chance that it's not an issue anyway. Well, the point here is just that don't go into things that sound too good to be true. Specifically, don't go to tax strategies that sound too good to be true, because most often they are. And worse off, the IRS doesn't care if you were well-intentioned on the front end. They're going to make you pay the fees. I'm trying to think of what they call
back interest
layers, interest fees. I feel like there's another thing I'm missing. But anyway, you're going to pay for it, and it's expensive, right? Like, I know this from firsthand experience, Rod. I have had times where I pay, like, let's say I paid my taxes, but I paid them even like 6 months behind for some reason, right? The amount of interest, taxes, fees that's like put onto, why can't I come up with the word? It's not just interest and fees. Penalties. Thank you. I knew there was another word. They pay penalties, interest, fees. It's just so painful. So anyway, the point is make sure that that's not you. Don't waste money make sure that you do the due diligence on the front end so that you're not ending up paying through the tail on the back end.
And can I give maybe like a warning on that? Is if you found someone and they're the only one that's offering XYZ, and literally that's the only person you can work through to get it, then probably not going to work. And
good advice.
I also say, because we live in the life insurance world, let me just say this. If you're ever given something where you're going to be able to have your premiums deductible going into life insurance, and on the back end be able to take the money out tax-free, if that's ever what they're telling you, run. There are a couple of strategies that have been around for a long time like that. They've been blown up, but for some reason there are people out there who still try to say that they're legit and say that they've figured out a way to get it done. Ends up
just costing people. Okay, yeah. So I have so life insurance is is certainly one that fits into this category. Like there has been a lot of savvy, let's call them savvy, or maybe shady life insurance agents over the years who come up with kind of quote unquote sophisticated tax strategies around. So I think of things like the 419 welfare benefit plan. That one just absolutely became a huge problem for most people that got into it because, you know, it really was a tax strategy that was like masked in, you know, using life insurance. And so the point you're making, again, if it sounds too good to be true, if it's breaking all of those typical rules that we have to live by, well, chances are that individual or that organization doesn't have a corner on the new strategy in the new market, right? Yeah. So there's innovation and we want to look for it. We just got to make sure that we, you know, do the due diligence and we make sure that it's not too good to be true. Okay, Rod, the third thing that we see high income earners waste money on is buying $500,000 cars that are worth $400,000 the second you walk off the lot. Okay, can I just tell you, I've actually never met anybody who's purchased a $500,000 car. So this isn't actually true. But the point is still true. So I just wanted to use that to like really highlight the issue. If the same issue exists, if it's $100,000 car that suddenly you walk off and it's worth $75,000. Like that's a definitive, like immediate waste of money. Like I remember, Rod, I'll give you an example. So when we were affiliated with Guardian years ago, one of the rules inside the living balance sheet was specifically never buy new cars. Like that was just one of the rules, like never buy new cars. Doesn't matter if you can, just don't do it. You're just better off if you, can I just tell you, I know that that's true. I actually don't buy new cars, but I do lease them. And so, but I also know that it's probably not the most savvy financial move in the world. To your point earlier, it's a decision I'm making knowing the trade-off, right? But again, it is. And if you're somebody that can't afford to waste money, or if you're somebody that's like laser focused on a specific goal within a specific time frame, then these are the types of things that you could kind of cut out and really make up some ground.
Yeah. Can I combine this one with the last one?
No.
Because
nope, you can't.
I have seen people buy $500,000 cars as the tax write-off. And
okay, that's true.
I'm open to being convinced because there are enough people do it that I keep thinking to myself, well, there must be something to, but the reason why, here's the reason I see stuff like that. And I think it's gotta be rough, because if you have to spend $500,000 to deduct $500,000 from your taxable income, it's like, well, okay, so you have that and now you have the car. So, and I've seen where they go and they'll set them up as rentals, right? So we're in Utah, a convoy of really expensive cars driving down to Las Vegas, because that's where people come and actually rent those cars, right? So to doing that. But again, the tax part of it, I've just always had a hard time wrapping my head around.
Well, again, it's so one, it's a depreciating, like it's not an investment, it's a cost. And that's the first element that's different, right? So when we talk about trying to utilize tax strategies, like investing is the way to do it, right? Typically, just spending money for the sake of spending money for that reason isn't going to build us wealth, right? So again, that's kind of just a framework to think about. So in this case, if I buy a $500,000 car, even if I get the write-off, well, let's say that my income was 1.5 million, and that's why I have the ability to pay for a $500,000 car. Well, now I've reduced my income from 1.5 down to $1 million, but I've still got a big chunk of taxes I'm going to have to pay, and I'm going to have to put the money in the full 500,000. So that's why that element, becomes difficult unless you're just sitting on tons of cash and you feel great about it. So to your point, there could be situations where it makes sense. Situation's a boss. Okay, Rod, that was number 3. Number 4. And I'm not even sure what luxury subscriptions, we'll just say subscriptions that you forgot you signed up for. How many people have those? I do. I have some.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah. It's embarrassing when I see it. I'm like, oh my gosh. I'm like, I've been paying for that for a year and I totally spaced it. Haven't looked at it, haven't paid any attention to it. Just absolutely ridiculous waste of money. Now, and here's the thing. It's one of those things that when you're a high income earner, it's almost easier because you don't feel $100, $150 a month or something like that. But all of a sudden, if you've got 11 of them and you're not using 6 of them, that's probably a good idea to clean it up. You know what I mean? Yeah. And it absolutely is a waste of money. There's a million things you could do better than wasting subscription money. But I am guilty of what else I'm going to put on here? And this one's the most embarrassing for me, is spending money on games on my phone. I stopped doing it. I quit. I had to make a point where I was like, okay, this is ridiculous.
You had a problem.
I had a problem with it. And I came to a point where I had to look myself in the face, look in the mirror and say, all right, man, you've got a problem. You got to make some changes. But I did it. So it has been, I think probably close to a year since I spent and it was just one game, by the way. It wasn't even many games. It was just one game, and I'd get there and I would justify it by being like, well, it's it's cheaper than if I went to like movies and spent the same time. And that was my justification. But in reality, it was just that. It was justification.
That's funny.
Okay. So if you've got subscriptions, here's the other thing. There's tools out there that like make this really easy now. I'm trying to think of, I don't have them off the top of my head, but I see commercials for them. I hear promos for them. They're basically, apps that will streamline all of that and make sure that you can manage it directly from there. So it's not like, because that's one of the tricky parts, right? That's one of the reasons this happens is because if our financial or let's just say our digital world sometimes looks like a digital junk drawer, and we're thinking like, oh, I need to do this, but I can't remember the password, or I don't remember where I went to do this. Or, like that's what ends up happening, and we put it off till later. And then suddenly it's a year later, and we're like, oh, well, I just wasted $1,800 on this ridiculous subscription. So there's one. Don't waste money on subscriptions. Okay, that was number 4. Rod, number five, and these ones are the ones that cost people lots of money. Number 5, falling for once in a lifetime investment opportunities. I would just suggest this. While there may be some once in a lifetime investment opportunities, there are some. Anyone that's promoted as that probably isn't it. You know what I mean? Because like typically a good investment, even if I hit big in the tech world, right? Which ends up, let's say that I invested early in Tesla, or I invested early in one of these, massive tech companies. Well, those would have been like a once in a lifetime investment opportunity. And yet, like, if that's the way that you're being like, lured into it, probably best to run. Probably.
Yeah.
Now, I'll say this. Oh, go ahead.
And it's usually with a lot of pressure, like it's a once in a lifetime and you have to make a decision by 5:00 today or else it's gone. Right.
Yeah.
When you combine those
quickly, that's a bad sign. That is definitely a bad sign. Okay. So here's what I'll say to that. I don't view that the same as taking a portion, like let's say I have 5% of my overall money that's focused on higher risk investment opportunities. Like maybe that stuff is in, blockchain and those types of things. But the reality is those situations are like defined and strategic. What we're talking about here is, and especially this becomes especially bad when somebody's like, you're getting pressure. Maybe you've got, and so you're like, let me go I'll go anywhere I can to get the money. I borrow from, on a HELOC, I take a bunch of money there, and then the deal blows up, and all of a sudden, not only am I like out the investment, I'm like, struggling to make house payments, like those kind of things that can really snowball and cost people. And so you just have to be thoughtful and watch out for those. That comes down to just some basic due diligence, and you can usually avoid at least getting sucked into something that you don't really know the risk that you're taking on it.
Yeah, I think you made a good point, because if it's a strategic part of what you're trying to do, if you're trying to find, if you would love to find the next Uber, DoorDash, or whatever, like you said, these kind of tech companies, they're going to come and blow up into those companies. If that's a part of your strategy and you're saying, okay, well, 5% of my investable, assets, I'm going to put in a variety of different companies to try to hit it big. Well, that's strategic. That's no longer like, yes, you're looking for that once in a lifetime, but to your point, it's not them just approaching you and saying, hey, this is it, get on the ground floor. If you don't now, whatever, then that's.
Yeah. And you're going in with your eyes wide open, knowing the risk profile, right? You might be saying, hey, I realize that of these 10 tech stocks that I'm buying into, 7 of them are likely to just not make it at all. 3 of them, have a chance to do well, and hopefully one of them hits it. Like if you go in understanding what you're doing and it's a strategic decision, like go for it, right? And I view that very different than kind of being sucked into hey, I just ran across this deal that someone said, their grandma's brother's uncle knows the landlord and got an 80% discount. No, I'm just kidding. You get my point. Like those are the kind of things we're talking about. Okay, Rod, that was number 5. Number 6, spending like a millionaire. Okay, I should probably put we'll say spending like a multi-millionaire before you're actually a multi-millionaire. Because millionaire is like not as high of a standard as it once was, right? That looks a lot different. So if half of you listening to this show make $700,000-800,000. Well, okay, so we got to talk a little bit bigger than that, but the point is exactly the same. And this is just lifestyle creep in a different version. So we've talked about this at a fair amount of detail, just making sure that we're not getting ahead of ourselves. And the easiest way to do that is to make sure that we track it, right? Like long as if you track it, it's really easy, but it can get away from you really quickly if you aren't organized enough to actually see that. Because most people that make a bunch of money are pretty smart people that can see if there's an imbalance, but it ends up being a situation where maybe they're not paying as close enough attention to it, and then it kind of gets away from them, and now they're playing catch up, right? So that's kind of what I would suggest, making sure that you're tracking your actual activity so that you're always running, you're never running on a deficit. You always have a profit and a margin in there that gives you a chance to do your kind of baseline important things, like putting money in, for like in your short-term savings for emergencies, like making sure that you have all of your core insurances, you're putting some money in like for future investments. That has to happen kind of first and foremost. And then once you've done those things, spend it however the heck you want. Yeah.
And especially when you see that raise, especially if it's a significant jump where you're saying, oh, I'm becoming a partner, or I'm even when, leaving residency and now I'm getting into my kind of first real job. Like you're saying, be methodical about that. And as you see incremental increases in the future, allocating that towards investing or towards, something that's specific, which again, it's just being intentional, making sure that if I'm going to get to my goals, it's because I'm making the decisions today that'll help me get there.
Yep. Exactly. Okay, Rod, that was number 6. We are we're flying through these. Number 7, paying a premium for convenience instead of value. Now, I want to just clarify that last part is very important.
Yeah.
Instead of value, because I am very much a person that believes in paying for convenience. I'm the person who doesn't want to run to the store, so I'm going to use like some sort of service to have stuff delivered to me so that I can stay in my groove. I can do my thing. It doesn't have to throw me out of my element. So for me, that feels like genuine value, right? Now, I'm not going to suggest that there's no waste that happens in there. Every time I use DoorDash, I think, gosh, I probably could have just like saved a few, 25% off of my bill, and yet I still do it. So like, I get it. We're not now, Rod. You're probably better at these things. Actually, as I think about it, truth time, Rod. Is there any of these things that you do? I'm not even kidding.
Oh, well, this when I on the front end, I mean, yes, I have the subscriptions that I forgot about.
Okay, that would make sense.
Find later. And
you
this
are
one
very
is one
frugal though, so that's why I wondered.
Yeah, we try to be, but this is one as well, paying for a premium for convenience. Okay, so it's not easy sometimes.
Rod's lost for words.
You have to like sometimes you justify it, right? And then absolutely. I'll always take that second look at it, but no, I mean, absolutely, there are things.
Okay, again, well, that makes me feel better. If Rod's victim of some of these things, anyone listening to this, if you're feeling bad, don't feel bad. Rod even has a problem with a couple of these things.
Well, and like I said in the beginning, I knew getting to this one in particular, you do it, right? And
I do think that instead of value is a critical element, because if it's valuable to you, then there's an element
like the lightning pass
value, like a lightning pass. Yes. Okay. Great example. If I'm going to go to Disneyland, dang it, I am going to make sure that I'm getting like the best possible experience I can. I don't want to spend my whole time waiting in lines. I know that's like, it's convenient. I like it. It's more fun. To me, that's like tremendous value. But for somebody else, they might look at that and just be like, what an absolute waste. And so again, depending on your point of view, it could be both of those things. So if you're going to pay a premium for convenience, just make sure you're doing it for things that are valuable to you, right?
Yeah.
Okay, that's number 7, Rod. We are on to number 8. Paying for, this one's going to be fun. Paying for cash value life insurance that's all cash and no value. Okay, now that doesn't make that, like, someone's going to hear that, like, wait, what? So here's what I'm really saying. We're saying paying, like, it's too frequent that we see people, and by the way, this is why life insurance gets a bad name. It's too frequent that we see people who are paying for life insurance that has not been optimized. So like, it literally isn't building cash, or if it is, it's like building it very slowly. And then suddenly that's their view of like what life insurance is. Right. Yeah. But again, and so that's why, that's a big part of why life insurance can sometimes get a bad name, is because of that issue. It has the, agents have the ability to design something that's going to, have 80% plus cash value year one versus nothing in year one. That's a big, big difference. And it takes a long time to get ahead if I'm using that super inefficient version of life insurance. And so this one is less on the listeners, like people who we see, and it's just more on advisors who need to do a better job and make sure that they've got people's best interests ahead of their own. But unfortunately, that's not always going to be the case. So it's up to you as high income earners to make sure that when you purchase life insurance, it's optimized for the things that you want it to be optimized for. So typically the best value is to get a policy that we would qualify it as maximum cash, lowest cost. So minimum cost, maximum cash. That typically is going to be, and even if you're needing death benefit, the best thing to do is to fill in the gap with term insurance usually. Yep. Let the cash value in the policy that's optimized continue to build and take over the kind of build out to where the term can drop off of that. Because just like it really is sad. The difference between highly optimized cash value life insurance and the stuff that Dave Ramsey throws under the bus, there's a wide world of difference there. And again, it could be something that costs somebody hundreds of thousands of dollars over the life of a policy.
For sure. Yeah.
And that's no good. And so that's what, now the good news, Rod, is everybody listening to this is most likely like we would never do that. We've heard Rod and Christian say 1,000 times, minimum cost, maximum cash. So that's probably not you, but maybe you have some friends that run into this kind of thing. Make sure you pass along the message, minimum cost, maximum cash. That's the only way to do it. You have to have your life insurance optimized. Otherwise, it genuinely could cost you a lot of money. Fair?
Yeah. And one thing we often don't clarify is in this version that we're talking about that's optimized, you do start with a lower death benefit, which is why Christian said, hey, make up the difference with term. But what happens is as you're growing that cash value, which again, it's optimized to grow it, your death benefit is getting bigger as time goes on. So if I'm 40 years old and I buy an optimized whole life policy and a 20-year term policy, chances are by the time I get 20 years later, especially if I have been putting money in for all that time, the death benefit's probably grown to be what I wanted it to be anyway. Mm-hmm. The term falls off. I have that much in my cash value. And especially when you fast forward to life expectancy, it just gets to be pretty big. And so it's not even that you have to long-term give up death benefit to get this growth, but because you have higher growth, it just pushes into those higher amounts of death benefit as well.
Yeah, that was well said. I think that was an important clarification. So, okay, make sure you're not paying for crappy cash value life insurance. Okay, number 9, Rod, betting on big trends that burn out fast. Okay, when I think of that, I think of things like in the 90s when I think penny stocks kind of came about in the 90s, but I think about things like that are like that kind of come onto the scene and people get really excited about and typically don't have staying power. Mm-hmm. And that can cost us a lot of money. Now, I also want to say, I'm not suggesting we don't look for opportunities for innovation. We don't look for new opportunities that could help us continue to grow our wealth. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about specifically, working off of things that are very much like you can kind of see that they're more likely to be a trend And maybe the easiest way to think about this is what is it based on? Does it have the underlying principles that are in place that align with how we know wealth grows? Or is it, a little bit shaky? And that can be kind of your litmus test.
Yeah. And one thing that comes to mind on this one is, like, let's say you're approached by your friend who's building up this business, and the motivation that they're trying to get you to go is, it's the trend. All the kids are doing. So think about fidget spinners, right? So let's say whatever it was 5 years ago, your friend comes, hey, these fidget spinners, they're all over the place. Everyone's buying them. So at the very least, recognize it for what it is, right? It could be a great opportunity.
Yeah.
Just realize that it's likely going to be short-lived. If it's what all the kids are doing right now, it probably won't be what all the kids are doing in a year from now. So you jump on it and,
So you're saying, Rod, that if you went all in on Pogs in the 90s, that probably didn't pay off with massive wealth?
Not through.
Do you remember
today.
Pogs? Do you remember Pogs?
No.
Oh, was that you? Oh, you didn't know Pogs? Okay, they're they're these little like cardboardy circular card things, and you stick them up in a pile, and then you have this like, I'm trying to remember what they called the paw. Like you would use it and you would, what was that called? Anyway, you would toss it down onto your stack of cards and see how many of them could turn over. And like, that would be how you won points. And they had all sorts of different cool Pogs. I can't believe, but I forget, Rod, you're like almost a generation ahead of me. And so this would have been like
a generation. What am I, 8 years old?
Almost 8. Well, I mean, is 10 years a generation?
When you're in high school, it's a
80%. You're 80% of a generation ahead of me. And so somehow you must have been a little bit older when Pogs were like large and in charge, but Pogs were definitely a big thing. I very much doubt that if you bet the farm on Pogs, it paid off in a big. Now, to your point, if you go in with an investment that you're like, hey, this is a trend, it's something that I'm hoping to make money on in the short term. I know again, if you go in with eyes wide open, it's different than just like not realizing it. You know what I mean? Yep. Like not having any foresight to think through like, okay, what does this look like? Not just a year from now, but 3 years and 5 years from now. And some of those things are kind of obvious. And you gave a good example, like while fidget spinners are still a thing, and they're probably always going to be a thing, they're not the thing that just everybody's buying.
Yeah, like they were.
You know what I mean? Like they were years ago. Okay, so don't bet big on trends, the burn out fast. Okay, Rod, our number 10 is sitting on piles of cash while inflation eats it alive. Ooh, we don't want to be that person.
I think this is a really important one to talk about, because when a lot of times people will think about, well, I want to have my money in a place where I don't have any risk. Okay.
Yeah.
And so you think about, well, putting it in a bank account, it's pretty safe, right? I don't have any risk. Or having it in my safe in my house, right? No risk. Well, this exposes there is a risk. And hopefully this is news.
Significant
I don't
risk,
think it's
actually
news. But we see this where people are afraid of what might happen, and so they sit on a bunch of cash. And well, we've seen, especially in the last few years, that if it was sitting there in whatever 2020 and it's still sitting there now, hopefully you had it in a place where you were earning something. But if not, then you lost probably 25% of the value or something.
Yeah, huge. Okay, can I have a confession to make, Rod? This one is me as well. Me, of all people. Okay, so people might be thinking like, well, I'm going to explain myself at least. So here's the deal. I have money in places like the market. I have money, obviously, alternative assets. We've talked a lot about that. We have money in life insurance, lots of money in life insurance, and yet the problem that I have, Rod, is that I don't have enough space in my life insurance policies to put the needed amount of cash. So I need to create more space that we can dump in more cash. That's a conversation for later. But this ends up being me at times too, because I I don't want to put it in the market. I don't like, not that there's not money I want to put in the market, but like, let's say it's my liquid money that I've just, let's say it's the business money. Let's say we're carrying $500,000 that we just use to run the business. Well, that's still something that is huge. Like, it's a massive waste of money to just have it sitting in the bank. Even if it's like actively being, moved in and out, like if money's going in and out of there, because if your typical balance is somewhere in the $500,000, to your point, inflation does what it does. And suddenly I don't feel it in the moment, but that $500,000, to your point, suddenly is only worth $400,000. And if I were taking it 2 years earlier, you know what I mean? And so, like, again, the thing that makes this difficult is we don't feel it in the same way we feel something that like eats, like if it literally took money out of our account, but that's actually like what it's doing. We just can't see it happening. So back to our point. Well, then the question is, what do I do instead, Rod? Well, the easiest way is life insurance, cash values. Like, you get the liquidity, you get the safety, you get the loan provision, you get the death benefit. Like, that's, in my mind, the best place to hold liquid cash. And again, if I have like a specific goal of growing it, like the market could be a reasonable place to have cash too. But again, just specifically cash that we want to be liquid, safe, but not doing nothing. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So the risk of being a broken record, because I think we've said this on a bunch of them, the point here is really to be intentional about it. So say, okay, so for me, there is a certain amount of money I want to have sitting in my local bank that I can jump down and grab access to it, right? But above that, having a cash value life insurance policy, I keep that. And so I do this.
Or a couple or multiple, right? Like, one of the challenges that I described, and we have lots of cash value life insurance policies, because part of the challenge with life insurance is that we have to be really strategic. We have to be strategic about how much money we put into it, right? Because of the way we design it, we're not putting one singular lump sums in and saying, okay, that policy is done. Typically, we're going to fund a policy for at least 3 years, right? So if I'm funding for at least 3 years, I have to kind of be a little bit more thoughtful, intentional about what my money flow is going to look like. But if I can do that, like, it might even be a situation where I fill up the first one and you could continue to fund that one, and then you add another one to it. Those are the kind of things that we see. And the people who are like really being efficient, that's exactly what they're doing. They'll likely have multiple policies over their investment lifespan that they're doing, multiple things with. Obviously, the kind of core one using that money to invest, but it also acts as like a emergency fund and things like that.
Yep.
So, okay, Rod, I have 2 final bonus points I wanted to hit on. Okay.
All right. Bonus.
Okay. These ones are bonus. I know we were talking about top 10, but I just felt like these ones would be fun to hit on. Okay. Number 11, Rod, expensive toys that collect dust.
Yeah.
And anybody who has those, they know exactly. Okay, I have to tell a quick story on this. Now, this actually isn't an expensive toy. This wasn't one that I bought, but my dad passed away at 49. I was 19 when I was in a different state. I was on an LDS mission at the time in Virginia, right? So I come back home, and my brother kind of took over my dad's boat. And so what I think about here is we had this boat sitting there, and it was a decent boat, and it just like sat there in the sun for like 2-3 years. And then we're like, oh, we should really do something with this. Go back to the boat, and it's just a mess. Like, we just wasted the boat. It was not even like recoverable at that point. Turns out if you let something just sit there, collect dust for too long, it doesn't create. So obviously that's not one that I bought, but it's what comes to my mind because I do know a lot of people. I can't tell you how many people I've seen like drive by houses, and they have, RVs or boats or things like that you can tell haven't been used in like 5 years. You know what I mean? Yeah. And so it is one of those things where if you're going to use it, that's like a family activity that you can like really get value out of, then it's awesome. Go for it. If it's something that, not really your thing, then maybe you're better off to just try renting them a couple times and then see if you really buy into it before you go all in and buy those big items that end up, costing a bunch of money and sitting on the sideline collecting dust.
Agreed.
Last one, Rod. The last one, big vacations with bigger stress. Okay, I'm all about a good vacation. I am all about a good vacation. But if your vacation is going to make you feel more stressed, then it's probably not worth it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I see people, and again, the situation's the boss here. It always is. But too often, people feel like they have to go so big on these kind of one-off vacations that they're creating like stress on some of the things that they, on some of their other goals, or sometimes even just ability to pay bills and stuff. Right now, that's obviously more extreme, but it certainly happens. So don't be the person that's spending 50 grand on your vacay, but struggling to make your house payment. You know what I'm saying?
Agreed.
Don't be that person. Okay. Rod, that's all I had. Those are all of our core 10 plus 2 bonus items. Are there any thoughts you have before we close it up for today?
I think this has been fun.
If you're a high income earner that has all these incredible opportunities to do lots of fun things, make sure you're doing them. Just make sure you're not wasting money. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next week.
Thank you for listening to the Money Insights podcast. To learn more about the financial and business strategies discussed in this show, please visit moneyinsights.net. The views and opinions expressed on the Money Insights podcast are not intended to be individual financial, tax, or legal advice. Always consult with the appropriate advisor before making financial decisions. And if you're enjoying the show, please feel free to rate, subscribe, and leave a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. This will help others find the show and learn wealth-building strategies for themselves. Thanks again for tuning in, and we'll catch you in the next episode.